You seem to have done very well. Usually, if you don't fall over. But even if you do fall over. Okay. That happens sometimes in long meditation. People fall over. When I first started meditating, which was years ago, I was in Boulder at the Marba House. It's a rooming house, kind of an upscale Buddhist rooming house. And I had lots of ideas of what I thought Buddhist communities were going to be like. I actually hid my cigarettes in my car. I didn't want anybody to know about that. Lied on my application about being a vegetarian. I wanted to be, so I said I was. But it turned out they weren't vegetarians, and they smoked, and nobody cared. But I had all these ideas that I thought were supposed to be, what it was. And I remember a few weeks into it, sitting and practicing with people, I was in the shrine room, and we had evening chants were at 6 o'clock. So during the week, people would come from work. And at one point I was sitting, and I just noticed that this was a room full of people dressed for work, some in suits and ties, all just sitting there doing nothing but staring straight ahead. And that's something that we take for granted, I guess. You assume that's what it will be. But when I actually sort of saw it, and from a bigger perspective, the absurdity of it, I couldn't stop laughing. It just seemed so crazy to me that people would just be sort of sitting there staring. And that experience stuck with me. And it's the kind of experience that we're going to talk about a little bit today. This is my personal first time that I saw things from an experience outside of my own small-minded projections of it. Now I'm going to meditate. Now I'm going to try to be good. Now I'm going to, control my mind and become enlightened, and all of these things that have nothing to do with real experience. And then the opposite of that, connecting to this awareness, this bigger awareness where you sort of see the big picture of things. Sometimes people have that kind of experience in the arts or performing. You're a musician, But occasionally, you ever have that experience where you're not in it anymore, you're sort of seeing it from a bigger perspective, or something like that? Did you ever have that experience that didn't incorporate drugs?
Sure.
I was joking. I'm just see. That's my small-minded projection on what a musician would be, assuming what a musician's life is like. But we have that experience sometimes. We do that, making love or skiing or doing sports, where all of a sudden we're synchronized so much that we're not doing it anymore. It's just kind of happening, and we're in this larger picture. It's said traditionally in the teachings that that's an experience of nirvana, you might say, in some traditions. Enlightenment, enlightened mind, you might say, in some traditions. But to be more prosaic and I think more accurate, we could just say it's an experience of a gap. The gap in our otherwise distracted, habitual way of looking at everything, Something just shifts and we just see things clearly for a moment. In the 12-step traditions, they talk about islands of clarity, moments of clarity, where all of a sudden the clouds part and you see things that you were looking at for so long, but then you see clearly, And these things, whether they happen on stage or with a lover or during a sports experience, wherever it is, or in meditation, these things actually are just fleeting. They just happen quickly. They're glimpses. Gaps, you might say. Little gaps in our experience where the sunlight comes through. The interesting thing is, we might think, well, that's it, if that's it, and I'm pointing to it in this talk a little bit. And then you might think it's a thing, so I should do that. Or people who are really good at this, people who are adepts, do that all the time. They just live in this gap, But that's not really realistic. nor is it helpful. And in fact, it's quite materialistic. So the material that we're going to talk from today comes initially from the teachings of the Buddha, his first major seminal teaching on the Four Noble Truths, and filtered through and explained by Chögyam Trungpa, who is maybe the greatest meditation mind of his generation, in my opinion. I'm sure that people have different opinions, and people feel differently, but many people involved in meditation in a contemporary way consider him one of the great minds. And this book is the book that we're using here as a text, called The Path of Individual Liberation. This is ours, but it's part of a series called The Profound Treasury. How many people have been here for the other talks in The Profound Treasury? So we've already discussed in this section, in the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering. This is the origin of suffering. And this is going to be the cessation of suffering. The Four Noble Truths are suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation, which is our talk today, which is that glimpse is a part of that sort of experience that we maybe aren't suffering all of a sudden. And then it comes back again, right? And in order to elongate that, in order to make that more of a reference point for us, maybe make that as important in our lives as the suffering is, as all the complaint is, as all the list of all the crap and dross we have to live through, that there are these moments of clarity and brilliance, that they, in time, become more important. Maybe guide us in some direction. Even though we can't hold on them, we can't bring them to the bank, we can't kind of proffer them in any way, we actually can let them guide us and lead us into a state of wakefulness, awareness. The fourth noble truth is the truth of the path, and the path is the way to get there. The first noble truth, the truth of suffering, you could equate in some ways. I'm going to just bring the 12-step reference in one more time, but because I don't want that to be too solid. But in a way, one thing that always impresses me about that system, which I've tried myself, worked on, and failed at a bit, and has become kind of an important, as a teacher, kind of process for me. It's a process I really respect, and it begins, this is the beautiful thing, it begins with accepting that you have a problem, accepting that there is an issue. Well, it's interesting because that's exactly what the Buddha taught initially. He might not have used the words, you have a problem, or you are powerless, or any of this, but basically what he said was his students, and indeed everyone, should recognize the fact that we suffer, that suffering is here. And the avoidance of it, the ignorance of it, the belief that we should be beyond it or above it, is all causing more suffering for us, if that makes sense. That to begin to say, I have a problem, I'm human, I suffer. I have a heart, it breaks, is the beginning of us beginning to experience what it really is to be human. Instead of this psychological interpretation of what we think we're supposed to be. And one thing, Buddhism points a lot to this direct experience, and we'll talk more about that. But the cliches about Buddhism, which is really interesting, are anything but, you know? They all seem to be, well, aren't Buddhists supposed to, and aren't you supposed to, and aren't you supposed to be really happy? You know, and where's the supposed to? What does that have to do with anything, really? So the cause of suffering, the actual perpetration of, what's the word I'm looking for? The actual, not perpetuation of suffering, not the cause initially, but to keep perpetuating it, comes from this sort of fake ideas of what it is to be ourselves and be Buddhists, these phony ideas, these very superficial ideas. And Trungpa talks about it as being vague, that we're actually vague. We're vague about our practice. We're vague about our commitment to waking up. We believe all of these things, like we're supposed to do this, or Buddhists are supposed to be a certain way, and Buddhist teachers are supposed to live this way, or other people are supposed to be that way. All of these supposed tos. What do they have to do with our actual experience? What is really here? So his instruction for the students was to be here and to pay attention to what's actually happening now. If suffering is here, it's here. And to try to get away from it or ignore it or have some sort of vague saying that's going to make us feel better. I don't know about you, but my Facebook feed, and if anybody here is not on Facebook, God bless you. And maybe you don't even know what I'm talking about. But for those of us that are sort of stuck in samsara, the samsara specifically created by Facebook, Mr. Zuckerberg and the rest. And it is kind of a samsara, right? And there is a kind of a hope and fear in our feed, is coming through. It's rife with all kinds of sayings, right? Beautiful sayings about how we're supposed to live our life and the way things should be. My brother is wonderful. I love him. He's a wonderful guy, but he's very, lonely, frankly. And then just posts all of these things about how beautiful life should be and can be and is, and sayings about how we should be and things like that. It's very interesting because if you're taking your real deep advice from Facebook, it may be cause for concern a little bit. It may be worth looking into that. I mean, Facebook has a lot of value and there's a lot of good things for it. But real wisdom, real deep wisdom, isn't found on bathroom walls, I don't think, despite what Paul Simon said many years ago. It's really not handy sayings, and it's not crocheted beliefs. It is direct experience that comes from actually sitting there watching your mind. And meditation is the cornerstone of this practice of waking up, because we're sitting there watching our mind. So far from trying to clear the mind of thoughts or attain some kind of state, I would say meditation is more like glimpses, real sort of pictures of who you are and how you are. I teach in a few different places, but one place is a studio, and they offer a 30-day challenge and try to get people to come. And it's obviously a materialistic device, to try to get them addicted, but not for the money, but because people bite those hooks. They like those carrots and sticks. They say 30 days and that's my challenge and I'm going to do it. And it's interesting to watch people do it, but the instruction I give people when they do that, and the funny thing is about that is if you do meditate for 30 days, this is actually true of songwriting. There are songwriting intensives where you write a song every day for 30 days, or poetry intensives, any of these things. The beautiful things about them is you can't write masterpieces every day, right? And you can't have brilliant meditation every day, 30 days in a row. And it gets you to just stop looking for some kind of peak experience and just do it. Does that make sense? Just come in and go, wow, my mind is a jumble today. What better time to meditate, frankly? Wow, I couldn't stay awake today. What better time to meditate? Oh, I had a completely serene, and wonderful meditation. Well, that's fine, but I don't know that has more value than a difficult meditation. To actually just look at the mind and watch your mind and see the vicissitudes of our mental experience and how things come and go and move, how we constantly are trying to distract ourselves, how we're constantly trying to fall in love with things, how we're constantly fighting things, you know, these kind of patterns that we create is the way that we learn to liberate ourselves. It's not by trying to find this cessation of suffering, this gap in the suffering. So the third noble truth is that it is that suffering is not wall to wall. It has a beginning, it has an end, and in between there's a space. And in that space there's something really quite profound and beautiful. And it's also not describable or graspable or anything we can hold on to, and it's gone in an instant frequently, and that's fine. That gap, that momentary understanding that suffering is not necessarily solid, is pretty profound. It's pretty amazing. If you believe that there's some affliction that you have, some way you've been embarrassed all your life, something you hold on to, something that you define yourself by that's problematic, it may be a little threatening to know that it's not as real as you think it is. Have you ever had the experience of breaking up with somebody or being fired or somebody dying in your life, something really kind of tragic that way, where you're waking up to it in the morning, that heaviness, that heartbreak? And then have you ever had the experience that one day you wake up and it's not there? And then you remember, oh, right, I'm supposed to be heartbroken. And you actually listen, you bring it back. Like you wake up and go, it's a beautiful day, I'm really happy. Oh, she left. You know, and then you bring it back and you throw all that weight back on you again. That's a really kind of interesting glimpse of the way the mental process works. If we actually create these stories because they confirm us, they make us feel more real. They're actually, in a way, more comfortable to hold on to it. The I'm fat story, I'm under-educated story, the I under-earned story. The various stories about us that we hold on to and we think are really real and who we are, and none of those stories are as solid as we think. So people might believe it. They might go, well, you know, enlightenment is, in Buddhism, is this idea of complete peacefulness and openness, nirvana. And what we're saying here is that that's really not likely to happen in the age of Trump. It's not really likely to happen in New York City that much. But these little glimpses are more powerful than we think, because there are little cracks in the walls that we create between ourselves and everything else in our world, right? Little bits of sunlight can get through that when we kind of begin to admit that maybe my storyline isn't as thorough as I thought it was. Maybe there's something a little fishy in all of these stories. And then we could actually begin sometimes have glimpses of the bigger picture and almost see ourselves in a humorous way. Almost actually look at it and go, oh my goodness, there I go again. You know? That's me on a date. Oh my goodness. Right? That's me in the job interview. That's me wherever it is, right? These patterns and these things. The cessation of suffering is simply meant to imply that the suffering is not as solid as we think because we created it in a way. Yes, I know the world did it. Yes, I know people climbing over the wall have taken our jobs. Yes, I know there's lots of different stories. I don't believe that, by the way. But you guys don't know me. I don't really know who's taking our jobs. But everybody's got stories, right, about what they are and how they could blame their sadness or their difficulty or their loneliness on these stories, right? The truth of the matter is everybody suffers. The truth of the matter is if you're human, you suffer, and it is nobody's fault, except your own for being born. For deciding I'm going to be a human, jumping into this pool, you know. But once you do, it's going to hurt. And once you do, the only way out of the hurt is to accept that there is hurt and that I'm actually perpetuating that hurt and making it worse by trying to get out of it or trying to ignore it or trying to fight it, you know? So when we do that, when we try to fight it and squirm in it, it's like a Chinese finger puzzle or game. You know those things? Does anybody know that? Am I dating myself now? This is really old. But there used to be these little sleeves. You put 2 fingers in, and the more you try to pull your fingers out, the tighter they get. The more you struggle, the more you're trapped. There's kind of an interesting dichotomy there. So the way out of the entrapment is the opposite, is relaxation, just like pulling your fingers out of the Chinese thing. It's that actually relaxation. It's actually to be able to meditate instead of push forward and fight your way through, punch your way through the pain and the suffering, to begin to relax and just accept and look at it. Turns the mind toward, we say toward the Dharma, but toward this possibility of glimpses of this openness. You know? I promise, I don't think you can really go, oh, I'm suffering, so wait, let me look for openness. It doesn't really work directly that way, right? But more like, let me relax and accept this, and then the openness has a chance of working its way in. Those glimpses. That's why this is the 3rd noble truth and not the 4th noble truth. I think in our natural Western way of looking at things, we would think beginning, middle, and the cessation is the end, and it's this big, beautiful, glorious thing, nirvana, But it's a glimpse. So the 4th noble truth is the truth of the path, which helps us elongate and, accentuate that gap. And to have that gap actually begin to permeate our lives more and more. And the path, which we'll go into more detail next week, I assume, we're following the correct. Or are we doing?
I think there's another chapter on the cessation.
There's another chapter on the cessation. So when we get to the path, the interesting thing about it is the path gets broken up into body, speech, and mind. And all I'm going to say about that is that that's a deepening of the process of our experience. And what I want to say, kind of briefly, I want to bring in a little of something of my own, Trungpa would say, my own thingy. But kind of like John, I'm also a coach. And one of the tenets of my coaching is body, speech, and mind. The idea that you could tell yourself anything in your mind, such as, I want to be enlightened, or I want nirvana, or I want peacefulness in my mind. You could say that in your mind, but does your heart believe it? And if your heart doesn't really believe it, if your spirit isn't really on board, then it's possible you'll reject it, actually, resist it, sabotage it, if you've ever experienced that. Have you ever made a commitment to yourself and then just didn't follow through? Has that ever happened? It's happened to me every morning, pretty much. Or I used to have a joke about how there was daytime Joe and nighttime Joe. And daytime Joe was always on a diet and was getting his stuff together. And nighttime Joe was like, it's 5 o'clock, happy hour, let's relax. It's like 2 different ways of thinking almost in one brain, And that's for me. Maybe not everybody's at that extreme, but I think we all have that idea that we have these thoughts, we have these ideas that we have. But can we follow them through by believing them in our heart? And the 3rd stage in the body is the idea that you could actually embody any change that you make. You could actually bring it into your present moment experience by saying, this is what I want to do now. Not just I think, but I feel, and then I am. What is it to actually believe it, And I think the path goes through those kinds of stages to really get us deeply committed to this idea that wakefulness, that openness, is a richer, better, clearer place to be than the craziness. And everybody would agree with that, do you think? Is anybody in disagreement? And we would say that, but see, that's the problem with thinking about the path as opposed to being on the path, right? So when we think about the path, of course we go, yes, nirvana is beautiful, that's what I want. But is it really what we want? Are we really willing to give up the things we're angry about? Are we really willing to give up our addictions? Are we really willing to give up, our prejudice, our beliefs, right? I always loved doing Dharma talks, and particularly remember back in the day we had all these people at the Shambhala Center. And I remember specifically, I think maybe in the beginning of the 2000s, and somebody got up and was really, really articulate about the path. It was just like cultivating and developing this openness. I think I had asked people could anybody share with what their vision of the path was, and open and beautiful and profound, and just flipped it right into, but not like those people from the Middle East who are, right? And this whole, didn't even see it, didn't get the irony, everybody's listening and some people following along. And this was closer to the day when things were a little bit edgier, and people were just assuming that some people were terrorists and that terrorists didn't have the same human qualities that we did, and that kind of thing, just making these assumptions. So Trungpa Rinpoche says that samsara, the spinning wheel of viciousness and addiction that we live in our society and in our mind, is based on the idea that we don't really pay attention to what's actually happening. It's kind of ignorance. And ignorance that gives birth to these habitual patterns, just of these patterns that if we ever looked at it, if we ever had a gap and looked at it, we'd go, this doesn't make any sense at all. But we just believe it. Somewhere in our heart we believe that these people are not right. We believe that some people are not right. We're all in New York now, so maybe we'd see it from another point of view. We might say, I don't know, somebody in leadership, a president or something like that, is just, we just write them off, right? But is that actually true? And it is actually being clear, and is it really helpful if we actually want to affect any kind of a change or anything? So are we willing to really look at the situation and go, the suffering and our fear of suffering has caused us to create these belief systems that have locked us away from being awake. They've kind of locked us in these patterns of thinking so that we always follow C with B. Follow B with C, unless we're dyslexic like I am and go backwards. But, right, we're always following these scripts, and these scripts can never be reality, because reality doesn't follow a script. Reality is what's actually happening. That John Lennon song that he wrote for his son, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. You're kind of locked in some plan conceptually, but your heart feels differently and the world feels differently, and circumstances are not at all what we think it is. For those of us that become committed to the path, we make that agreement with ourselves. We're actually, in a way, making an agreement to let things fall apart, to not follow all the plans, to not just go, okay, C because B happened, Actually let things fall apart a little bit so that the sunlight can come through. There could be a little gap. So the cessation of suffering, this idea that we actually could be free of suffering, again, is only momentarily. It's this idea that the cracks indicate that none of it is solid. So even if we go back to all of our delusion and all of our fear and all of our personal imprisonment, well, that gap was always there. And if that gap was there, maybe none of it really exists. And so that's when the next noble truth comes in, the path, to really begin to not just think it, but feel it and be it, to actually get it so in our system that our allegiance changes from solidity and sleepiness and the somnambulistic quality of just following patterns toward spontaneity and openness and wakefulness. We kind of shift our attention that way. So, any questions about any of that? Or comments, doesn't have to be questions. I mean, I've kind of left a lot of this talk still out because I was thinking you might finish it for me. No, it's just simply might have some thoughts about it. It seems to me the actual action involved in creating samsara, this spinning wheel of, it's an addictive cycle really, isn't it? We want something, we want it to be better, it doesn't happen, we crash, then we look for the next thing that's going to be better. We're constantly fed things that keep us moving instead of ever just accepting and being present, right? So we're constantly moving. The entire, I think, economy of the world could be based on this. There are many cultures, and our own in particular, based on the fact that we're not good enough, you know? I don't think there's that many commercials that come out going, you're fine, you're perfect, you're beautiful as you are. You don't need anything. That would be a cool commercial. But no, it's always like, yeah, except your teeth could be whiter. So I got something for you. Or you could be a little taller, so we got something for you. Or you could be a little richer, so we got something for you. And there's always something that makes us feel like we're not quite good enough, so we're reaching for the next great thing or something like that. These belief systems keep us in what's called ignorance. That's a fundamental term in Buddhist thinking. Ignorance doesn't mean stupidity. It means literally we're not seeing, we're not looking. We're not getting that big picture of this is ridiculous. A bunch of people in suits staring at the wall, right? We kind of miss that big picture because we're in this kind of little thing. And that ignorance, I think, causes us to begin to panic sometimes because we know we're not here. We know we're not awake. And that panic creates this reaction of grasping. Like, anytime there's a glimmer of space, we want to solidify it. We want to close it down because that space is really unsettling and frightening to the part of our mind that's addicted to the cycle. Does that make sense? So sorry. Right? Cyclical thinking, the grabbing, the dissatisfaction, so the grabbing further. That whole thing creates a lot of momentum. And that momentum is addictive. Like we constantly want to fix things and fix ourselves and stuff like that. I have a friend that always talks about, I haven't seen him for years, and I bet when I do see him, I just came back to New York, but when I do see him, I have a feeling that the same story will be there. Maybe I'm the one with the story now because I believe it, but maybe he doesn't have it anymore. But he always has this story about how he stays up too late and has to wake up early in the morning. Guess he's going to start getting up earlier in the morning. And we all kind of like laugh about that because he's always getting his life together and how, I'm addicted to Netflix, and I'm like, I don't know, it used to be drugs, but now it's Netflix, and I have to get up earlier in the morning. But it's like, if you ever just looked at him and said, bro, sleep in, it's okay, just relax. He actually hates that. He doesn't want to hear anything that's going to make it better. He's addicted to the story. Does that make sense? And the struggle around the story. Why would we do that? Why would we pick, let's say, an addiction, any kind of an addiction, alcoholism or drug addiction, Sure, it's fun sometimes, but most people that become addicted lose that fun part for a long time. They're in a situation where their lives are unmanageable, and they're crappy, and they're not healthy, and they're not happy, and they still can't get out of it. How many people are in these relationships, right? That don't work, that aren't helpful, aren't healthy, and they can't get out of it. Relationships with themselves, belief systems about themselves. Why would we actively choose to suffer? Why do you think?
It's familiar. It becomes part of your story.
It's familiar. That seems kind of silly, doesn't it?
It's not as scary as the alternative.
I'm not arguing with you, but yeah.
Comfort zone.
Comfort zone. So is our comfort zone that important to us that we actually will suffer, will continue to suffer, just to stay connected to that? What do you think?
I think that my life, I'm experiencing more and more loss. Loss of things that I value.
Mm-hmm.
People, lovers, children, money, health, the years of my life. To say that these are arbitrary addictions isn't quite right. I mean, there's some truth to that. But it's painful to lose things that one has become, call it addiction, attached to.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I regard it as, for me, a great, perhaps, if I follow the teachings, a great opportunity. But it sure isn't easy. And I can't philosophize it.
Right.
I'll give you an example. When my wife and I divorced, that was painful.
Mm-hmm.
That was 5 years ago. And I made some sacrifices so that I could be with my daughter half time, including coming to New York from where I was living at the time. And I did have her half time. She was with me, and it was, I love her very much, and it was a great joy. But now she's become a teenager. And for a variety of reasons, she wants to be with her mother. And her mother has decided they're going to move to Colorado. And she's going to be gone from my life completely. She's been increasingly gone. Now, I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just saying, these things happen. And it's painful. And the real issue is how to deal with that pain. And there are others, lots of others. I mean, I'm sitting here cross-legged tonight, and I've had to work at it because I've just had both hips replaced, and the second one didn't work, and they had to do it a second time. I mean, it just goes on and on like that, and I'm not asking for pity. Everybody in this room has things like this that happen to them. This is the suffering that the first noble truth, the things that we hold on to.
And it's different than the second noble truth, which is the compounding that suffering by creating more suffering, right? Like the things that you're saying, they're not addictions. They're the afflictions of our life. They're the things that actually happen.
Yeah.
And that heartbreak is what happens. What I'm talking about is, and then what's slightly different, and what we're sort of addressing is the way we try to get away from that, cover it up, right? A drug addiction that you could pick up so that you didn't have to feel the pain, right? Or a hatred you could lock into against people you perceive that hurt you. Yeah. These things actually, and thank you. Thank you for what you said. Because it is important to draw the difference. It's not about we can get away from the actual suffering of life. But
yeah, I guess the real question is, how do you deal with the inevitable, sometimes really painful suffering. I mean, I've got friends, who have experienced too now, who have told me stories about experiencing severe childhood sexual and physical abuse, and what that does to them as adults. I mean, the thing working with these kinds of issues is, I'm sure that's what meditation is for. It's just that bringing that to the path is how I find an enormous challenge. So,
yeah. Well, I like the way you said that it's really happening, right? That pain is what we're actually experiencing. That's present moment. It's the trying to get away from it and make it into a psychological thing that begins to create a thing. Like, I'm going to become a Buddhist so I don't suffer anymore. Or I'm going to kind of run away and join a this or that so that I don't have to feel badly anymore. So Trungpa Rinpoche, the source material, it's not exactly in the reading for today, but was in a book that was edited by a really brilliant editor called The Myth of Freedom. And I forget who that was. John, actually, was the editor of that. And he talks about operation like you're operating without anesthesia. That you're not deadening yourself. You're actually going in and you're looking directly at the suffering and experiencing what you need to experience. And that might sound difficult, but actually in my experience, I don't know that this is yours or general experience, but in my experience, I make the suffering worse, right? So by going into the suffering is never as bad as all the stuff I put myself through around it, Tax day. Oh, make that such a huge thing in my life. Starting now, right up till, April 23rd or whenever shall I get it in after my extensions. Kidding. But you know what I mean? And then it's done, and it's never that bad. And it's okay, right? So I don't want to belittle the experiences that you said, which are really profound. But I think we're all starting. I lost my mother recently, and we were very close. And, yeah, these things are very profound. They change you. They shift you, And I remember my sister and I sitting out on my mother's deck. We had this lovely deck that she had on her house. And we're sitting there, and my sister's a chimney. And she's just doing her circular breathing with her cigarette. And putting one out, putting another one out, And she's sober, so that's all she had. And she did great to stay with her sobriety and stay with the pain. But I remember the two of us she just looked at me and went, "You're the Buddhist, and if you tell me that all this is okay and that none of this is supposed to hurt, F you." I just said, "I'm never going to tell you that. I'm never going to tell you that." And one of the things that was really hard is how many people just try to make it all nice, Well, she's in a better place. And I feel her dancing right now. That's what somebody told me. I feel her dancing. I know she's up there dancing. It's like, my mother never danced. She was like 150 pounds overweight. She didn't dance. Like, there's no, and yes, this person's trying to make us feel better. So we hugged her and we said, okay. With all of these things that have nothing to do with making you actually feel any better than actually feeling your own pain. But the interesting thing, and I'll shut up here, is that according to the Buddhist teachings, where they're pointing, is that pain, when you look into it, doesn't get bigger and bigger and worse like you're afraid it will. It actually is fraught with all kinds of gaps. And my sister again going, "I actually felt really good today, and that makes me feel so guilty." So she had to feel bad again, right? But that no matter how bad we feel, there's always gaps around that. And if we could work toward that space and that openness, then I think that we have some sense of developing along the path. I think that's what the idea is. And I heard Pema Chodron once talk about this. She said, there's that little bit of space between all of your thoughts and all of your anxiety. Have you experienced that? And people are like, yeah. And she goes, okay, then just make that bigger. Just make that bigger. So I guess to some extent what we're trying to do is elongate those spaces so that we're more attuned to them. We can feel, and we start to believe them as much as we believe all of the other stuff. Any other comments?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm trying to, come to an accommodation with these changes in my life.
Yeah.
Health, daughter, money, a lot of things. And I think what I imagine is that it involves having a different idea of who I am and what my life can be, and be happily be. And I think of Tulku Ujin, Sutton Rinpoche's father, and Rinpoche, and Chögyam's father, and I was given, I went on a retreat a few years ago, and I was given a manual, a retreat manual, and I didn't know who wrote it, and then I found out he wrote it. And at the end of it, he says, don't have any friends. They're a waste of time. And then he says, and don't have any enemies either. They're a waste of time too. And then at one point he says, and when it comes time to die, if you're a real yogi, you go out and find a cave, and you die alone like an animal. I mean, that is so outrageous. It's so far away from the way that I conceive of my life. I'd like to have a lot of people around my bed when I'm dying singing hosannas, or at least the Shambhala anthem, and but it has this idea in it that in terms of dealing with suffering, of changing your expectation of what it is that one needs to be happy. I find it so hard.
Yeah.
If those expectations are so ingrained, that when those things are taken away, I find it really hard.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry, please. When my mother passed, there was also the house, which had all my stuff in the basement, and it was kind of the place where I figured if everything fell apart, I could always run back. If things fell apart, I could always run back to her.
Yeah.
Not to be live with her. I'd be like, I'll take care of you. But I always knew I had that space to go back to. And when I used to be on tour and stuff, I would go there in between, and it was always like a base, and we had to give that up. The actual place. What I found was I created a little cocoon in my room because there was a few months that it took to get the house ready, get it on the market, and all of these things. And I had this whole cocoon with my Netflix, and I actually had water right there, so I didn't have to get up out of the bed to create an entire little place because I didn't want to let go. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it was like the coolest, nicest room. People would come in and go, my God, my shrine. I had this huge shrine I created. And, my sister, being her, like the way she is, she was like, shouldn't you be letting stuff go? No, I will. I just want to get it right. Literally, get it right so I will have no pain. So I won't suffer. It's kind of so funny. And I'm sorry for your suffering.
No. Come on, everybody's got it. It's just, it's comes at different times in our lives, don't you think? And really, it's a challenge.
Sometimes it's pretty profound, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like the aging thing.
Like the aging thing.
People told me about it so much. They'd be like, you know, it's not gonna last forever. And I'm like, oh, I know. It's impermanence. I get it. But all of a sudden it happens. You start walking up the stairs and your legs are like, you're like stiff and going, whoa, what's wrong with my legs? Oh, I'm getting old. That's a like, I'm laughing about it, but it freaks me out. You know? When you actually experience it, and that's the difference. It's like thinking about those things is different than actually experiencing it. But when somebody dies close to you or somebody leaves close to you, you know, it's a different experience. Steve, any words of wisdom? Came all the way down here. This is my friend Steve. He came all the way down from Midtown.
It was not easy.
Not easy. It's a whole like 3 or 4 different cultural shifts.
Right, and two subways. Yeah.
And two.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I just embarked on sobriety. I entered going to AA and stopped drinking and whatnot. And it's just fascinating to come here and have this as part of the experience, suffering, the coming out of the fog and becoming aware of it, and then being able to deal with it. And it's profound, and it's fascinating, and it's exciting because now I don't have to do it anymore, and I'm really aware and a lot more to share. There's more of me to deal with things, and it's what you're talking about today is extremely relevant. It has a lot to do with what I'm going through. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming. How about you? Do you have any thoughts?
Oh, there were lots of topics. There were lots of topics I was able to relate to, especially the one you mentioned. Sometimes you wake up and you're like, have a blank mind, and the birds are singing, and then reality hits you. It's kind of this, takes these 3 seconds to boot, and you're back into where you were. It's crazy.
I think maybe one of the points of the talk too is which of those things is reality. So, because birds singing, that's certainly real, isn't it? You know, but we miss that for what we think is so important. But yeah, I know. Yeah. That feeling of like it's okay, and then the way that she left. Or whatever that is.
I have a story.
Yeah.
I have a little story. Years ago, after I had a series of relationships that didn't work out, and I was in this like constant state of being heartbroken, constantly, like it was like almost physical pain, and I was so addicted to this state. And one day, and it was a circle, and it took years and years and years. And then one day, in the East Village, I ran into an acquaintance in a guy called Mauricio, and he was like, "Hey, how are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Fishy character.
And then he was like, "How are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, the cliches, they got me." And then he was like, he looked at me and he said, "What are you getting out of it?" And then I had a moment, and it was good timing. Like sometimes you say it and it's not the right time, but that was the right time. And I will never forget that, because that was, when I started to work my way out of that stuff. So thanks a lot.
You're welcome. That was a complete random, this is, like you said, it's either the right time or it's not. But that's why you can't grasp on these moments of wakefulness. You have to just position your mind, and then when they come, they come. If you're in the right place, if your heart is soft and your mind is open, then things will come. There'll be more openness, I think. But you can't, I don't think we could just sit there and meditate. I heard it said like the frog meditator sitting there doing mantras, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the blessings to come. It's kind of like we have to position ourselves into that. But then when it happens, be present for it. Were you going to say something? Thank you. This was very nice. What about you in that seat of power there?
Oh, please.
with your holy Rakshu, is that what it's called?
Oh, okay. And I did have a little something I thought you might find interesting. This probably sounds totally ridiculous. This is an idea that I heard from the Soto Zen tradition that I practice, where we're taught to have faith that sitting itself is enlightenment. And really it strikes me as being totally absurd too, but I think that the more you hold this in your heart, like like I'm starting to get like little glimpses of that. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but I think it relates a little bit to the subject.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I was very taken, Rinzai and Soto is different. Although I studied a little in both traditions, but my most recent, I think they're similar in the idea too, is there's not a lot of instruction, Just like get out there and do it, and don't move. Don't clear your throat and stay in line, and stay in time, whatever. But just keep doing it until something kind of shifts, right? Whereas, in my tradition, the kind of more Shambhala tradition, we talk a lot, there's a lot of instruction, there's a lot of view, there's a lot of discussion.
I think the attitude is helping me just to let go of all my ideas of what meditation should be, all my preconceptions, and just be content with whatever my sitting practice is at the moment.
Non-meditation.
Non-meditation. Yeah. Thank you. Mark? You're welcome. Sasha, any words?
Yeah, sure. Like, I was sitting here listening to talking about losses and how what it's like when you lose your mother. Hold the button.
Is the button green?
Is that better? Yeah, it is. It's green. Okay. I'm sitting here thinking about what it's like when one loses my mother. And so many people in here have experienced it recently. And I feel like the way it happened to me, well, I guess we're going on 6 years. But when you were speaking about it, it was like so raw. Because I had so much empathy for you at that moment. And I thought about you, Joe. And when you speak about what it's like to have to let go, and that we have a practice that gives us exactly what we need to do.
Thank you so much. We have a little chant that we do at the end. It's in that page at the bottom, dedication of merit. And the idea here is that the language is very ornate, but it reduces down to the idea that rather than hold on to anything we might have gotten from this gathering or this meeting, or indeed anything in our lives, that we could offer it for the benefit of all, or with the aspiration that all beings kind of benefit, wake up. I think energetically, it's important not to hold on. It just stuffs you, and it gets things too tight inside. And the whole idea of cessation is opening, physically opening, as well as psychologically and as well as mentally, but to actually just let go. So, by this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the radiance wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.